The wheelchair rolled back before Monica Ellison could pivot the front wheels. Officer Darren Holt kept one hand on the right push handle. The chair moved several inches across the textured pavement. It caught briefly at the edge of the access lane, then stopped at an angle. Monica tightened both hands around the armrests. Her left hand moved to her abdomen. Beside the gate, the accessibility reader was still lit green. Active. Brooke Sandoval stood near the reader with her park tablet open. "The accommodation is approved," she said. Darren kept his hand on the chair. Caleb Ellison stood near the metal railing several feet away. His paper ride ticket was folded between two fingers. The Ferris wheel turned above the trees behind him. Monica looked toward Darren. "I cannot stand." Her voice stayed low. No one answered for several seconds. The reader remained green. Less than 2 minutes earlier, Monica had rolled the wheelchair into the designated access lane. It was at Hawthorne Adventure Park. She had already spent the morning using the chair. Her medical restriction limited standing and walking during the final weeks of her pregnancy. The park had reviewed the accommodation before issuing the access credential attached to her wristband. At the gate, the process took only a few seconds. Monica placed the wristband near the reader. The screen turned green. Russell Pike did not open the gate. He worked for Palisade Event Security, the contractor assigned to control pedestrian flow around several ride entrances. He looked at the wheelchair. Then he looked at Monica. A few moments earlier, an older white man using a cane had gone through the adjacent access lane. His wristband had produced the same green result. Russell had opened the barrier. No additional question followed. Monica received a different instruction. Russell asked whether she could get out of the chair. Monica said she could not. He asked whether she could stand long enough to show that the wheelchair was necessary. Monica kept both hands on the wheels. "The pass is active." Russell looked at the reader. "I can see that." He still did not move the barrier. Caleb shifted closer to the side of his mother's chair. His ticket showed the Ferris wheel logo. He had asked about that ride before they reached the accessibility gate. Monica had told him they would go there first. Russell looked past them toward the main walkway. Families continued moving through the regular entrance. The access lane remained blocked. Monica opened the small folder resting across her lap. The top page carried the name of her medical clinic. She held it up so Russell could see it. He did not take the page. Instead, he asked how long she had been using the wheelchair. Monica answered, "Several months." He asked whether she could walk at all. She repeated that her medical restriction limited standing and walking. Russell looked again at the green screen. Then he reached for his radio. Her badge identified her as a guest accessibility coordinator. She moved directly to Monica's side of the gate. Brooke scanned the wristband with her handheld unit. A second screen returned the same status. Active accommodation. No warning. No review flag. No expiration issue. Brooke looked at Russell. "This one is already cleared." Russell pointed toward Monica. "She won't complete the mobility check." Brooke paused. "What mobility check?" Russell did not answer immediately. He looked toward the wheelchair. Then toward Monica's medical folder. Brooke turned the tablet so Russell could see the visitor record. The approval was current. The access category matched the gate. Nothing on the screen required Monica to stand, transfer, or walk before entry. Brooke said the park did not use a standing demonstration at ride access gates. Russell folded his arms. He said he still wanted security control to review it. Monica closed the medical folder. She did not move toward the gate. She did not try to roll around Russell. Caleb stayed beside the chair. 2 minutes passed. The regular line continued moving. The access lane did not. Russell raised the radio again. This time he requested police assistance for a guest who was refusing an access screening instruction. Brooke looked down at her tablet. The screen still showed the same result. The police call had started. The accommodation had never failed. Russell Pike lowered the radio after giving security control the gate number. Monica stayed where the wheelchair had stopped. Brooke Sandoval remained beside the access reader with her tablet open. The screen still showed Monica's accommodation as active. Behind them, the regular entrance kept moving. A family pushed a stroller through the standard line. 2 teenagers passed through another lane. The accessible gate stayed closed. Russell looked down at Monica's chair. "How long have you been using that?" "Several months." He looked at the medical folder across her lap. Then he looked at her legs. "Can you walk at all?" Monica did not open the folder again. "My restriction limits standing and walking." Brooke tapped the visitor record. The page displayed the same access category she had already confirmed. The approval had been entered through Guest Accessibility Services. No secondary review was pending. No expiration warning appeared. Brooke scrolled farther down. There was no instruction requiring a guest to demonstrate mobility at a ride entrance. Russell watched the screen. He did not ask Brooke to cancel the credential. He did not ask whether the credential belonged to Monica. Instead, he pointed toward the open space beside the gate. He said a few steps would settle the issue. Brooke turned toward him. "The park doesn't use a walking test here." Russell looked toward the regular entrance. Another guest was approaching the adjacent, accessible lane. The man was older. He was white. A metal cane touched the pavement beside his right shoe. He raised his wristband toward the reader. The screen turned green. Russell stepped to the side. The man walked through. No medical paper changed hands. No additional question followed. The barrier closed behind him. Russell returned to Monica. Her reader result had not changed. Same green light. Same access category. Same entrance. Brooke looked from the closed barrier to Russell. She entered a short note on her tablet. Monica could see the movement of her hands, but not the wording. Russell shifted closer to the wheelchair. He asked whether the chair belonged to Monica. She said yes. He asked whether it had been prescribed. Monica placed one hand on the folder. The other stayed on the wheel. The park already approved the accommodation. Russell looked at Brooke. Brooke nodded once. She opened another screen. The record showed where the approval had been issued earlier that day. Guest Accessibility Services. The location was inside the park's main visitor center. The employee number attached to the approval was visible below it. Brooke read the entry. The approval covered wheelchair access and reduced standing time. Nothing on the page asked gate security to make a second medical decision. Russell reached for his radio again. Brooke raised one hand before he pressed the button. She asked who had authorized the additional check. Russell lowered the radio halfway. He said Palisade had been told to prevent misuse of the accessible lanes. Brooke looked at the tablet. That isn't the same as deciding whether an approved guest is disabled. Russell did not answer. For several seconds, only the park music carried through the gate area. Caleb unfolded his Ferris wheel ticket. He flattened one corner against the railing. Monica watched him do it. Then she looked back at Russell. The access reader dimmed after sitting unused. Brooke touched the screen. It woke again. Monica's status remained active. Several minutes of delay had passed. Brooke glanced at the clock at the top of her tablet. She added another entry to the incident note. This time, Monica saw the category before the screen moved. Access, credential, verified. Russell pressed the radio button. Security control. I still need police at Accessibility Gate 3. A voice came over the speaker. Copy, what's the issue? Russell looked at Monica before answering. Guest refusing an access screening instruction. Brooke stopped typing. Monica looked at Russell. The green reader sat between them. No one had said the credential was invalid. No one had said it belonged to someone else. No one had said the accommodation had expired. The wording on the radio introduced something new. The problem was no longer being described as an approved guest waiting for entry. It was now being described as a refusal. Brooke opened a blank line in the park incident record. She entered the time of Russell's transmission. Then she added one sentence beneath it. The accommodation remained active when police were requested. Brooke Sandoval left the incident screen open. Russell Pike still held the radio near his chest. Monica Ellison remained in front of the closed gate with both hands resting on the wheelchair wheels. Caleb stood beside the railing. His Ferris wheel ticket was folded again. Brooke looked at Russell. Who authorized the standing check? Russell shifted his weight. We screen for misuse. Brooke waited. That isn't what I asked. Russell looked toward the main walkway. A child ran past with a paper cup of lemonade. The sound from the coaster carried over the trees. Brooke kept the tablet in one hand. Who told you to ask an approved guest to stand? Russell did not name anyone. He said Palisade had been warned about people using disability access when they did not need it. Brooke opened the current operating procedure. She did not scroll through a long policy manual. The section for accessible ride entry fit on one screen. Security verified that the credential was active. Guest accessibility services handled eligibility. If a credential returned an error, security could send the guest back to the accessibility desk. Monica's credential had not returned an error. Brooke turned the screen toward Russell. This is the process at this gate. Russell glanced at it. He said Monica's situation did not look clear. Monica looked at him. She did not ask what he meant. Brooke answered instead. The credential is clear. Russell pointed toward the medical folder. Then why does she need all that? Monica lowered her eyes to the folder. She had brought the paperwork because pregnancy complications had already changed several parts of the summer. Doctor visits took longer. Walking across parking lots took planning. Standing in lines was no longer part of the day. The park had reviewed the restriction before issuing the accommodation. Nothing in that process required Russell to agree with how disabled she looked. Brooke tapped the guest record. The approval time appeared near the top. The accommodation had been issued before Monica reached the ride area. The employee identification number was listed beneath it. Brooke placed a call to Guest Accessibility Services. She used the park line. The call was answered within several rings. Brooke gave Monica's credential number. She did not describe Russell's opinion. She asked one question. Is the accommodation still active? The employee confirmed it. Brooke asked whether any additional mobility demonstration was required at the ride gate. The answer came through the speaker clearly enough for Russell to hear. No. Brooke ended the call. That created a third confirmation. The gate reader. Brooke's handheld unit. Guest Accessibility Services. Russell still stood between Monica and the entrance. He looked toward the service road. Police had not arrived yet. Brooke moved closer to the gate control. She did not open it. Russell still controlled the physical barrier under the contractor assignment. That distinction now mattered. Brooke controlled the accommodation record. Russell controlled whether the gate moved. Monica looked at Brooke. Am I cleared to use this entrance? Yes. Russell turned toward her. We're waiting for the officer now. Monica did not raise her voice. What is the officer verifying? Russell looked toward the service road again. Whether this needs to go further. Brooke made another entry on the tablet. She recorded that Guest Accessibility Services had confirmed the accommodation remained valid. Then she documented that the access gate was still closed. Caleb shifted from one foot to the other. The Ferris wheel continued turning above the park. One car reached the highest point and stopped briefly before moving again. Monica watched it for a second. Then she looked down at her hands. She had not moved the chair since Russell called police. She had not approached the gate. She had not tried to pass him. The disagreement had become narrower while the response had become larger. Russell's first concern had been whether Monica needed the wheelchair. The park system had already answered that. His second concern had been whether the accommodation was legitimate. 3 separate park checks had answered that too. The remaining issue was the test Russell had added. Brooke looked at him again. If the officer asks what policy requires her to stand, what will you say? Russell pressed his lips together. He did not answer. The radio on his chest crackled. Security control announced that Glenhaven Police was entering the South Service lane. Russell straightened. He closed his hand around the radio. Brooke looked down at the tablet once more. The screen showed Monica's name, the active accommodation, and the incident note created at the gate. Nothing in the record said she had failed verification. Nothing in the record said the pass was invalid. Nothing in the record required her to stand. A marked police unit appeared beyond the maintenance fence. Russell walked toward it before the vehicle had fully stopped. Brooke stayed beside Monica. The first person to reach Officer Darren Holt would be the person who had created the extra test. Officer Darren Holt stepped out of the cruiser and closed the door behind him. Russell Pike reached him first. The two men stood near the service lane, several yards from Monica Ellison and the closed accessibility gate. Monica could not hear every word. She heard enough. Russell pointed toward the wheelchair. He described a guest who refused an access screening instruction. He did not begin with the green reader. He did not mention that Guest Accessibility Services had already confirmed the accommodation. Brooke Sandoval moved toward them with the tablet still in her hand. Darren looked past Russell as she approached. Brooke kept it short. The credential was active. The park had already approved the accommodation. There was no standing demonstration in the access procedure. Darren looked toward Monica, then toward the wheelchair. He walked to the gate. Monica remained where she had been waiting. Caleb stood near the railing with the folded ride ticket in his hand. Darren stopped a few feet from the chair. "Can you stand?" Monica looked at him. "No." He looked down at the footrests. "Can you transfer to that bench?" The bench sat beyond the gate rail, several feet away. "My restriction does not allow that." Brooke stood to Darren's left. "The accommodation is already approved." Darren turned toward her. Brooke held up the tablet. The active status was still visible. She explained that eligibility had been handled by Guest Accessibility Services before Monica reached the ride area. Darren asked whether Brooke had personally issued the credential. She said she had not. She had verified it. He looked back at Monica. That distinction kept the question open for him. Brooke opened the visitor record again. The issuing employee number was listed. The approval category matched the entrance. The confirmation call from Guest Accessibility Services had already been added to the incident note. Darren read the screen. He did not ask Brooke to contact the issuing employee again. He did not ask Guest Accessibility Services to withdraw the pass. The credential remained active. He stepped closer to Monica. "I need to resolve the mobility question." Monica looked toward Brooke. Brooke's tablet was still open. "What mobility question?" Darren pointed toward the chair. "Whether this accommodation actually fits her needs here?" Brooke shifted the tablet under one arm. The park already made that determination. Darren looked at her. Then he looked at Russell. Russell stayed near the gate control. The barrier remained closed. People continued passing through the main entrance 20 yards away. No one in those lanes was waiting for police. Monica opened the medical folder across her lap. She removed the top sheet. The clinic name appeared across the header. Below it were the restrictions. They matched what the park used to approve her accommodation. Pregnancy-related mobility limitation. Wheelchair use. Limited standing. Monica held the page toward Darren. He took it. His eyes moved down the sheet. He reached the restrictions section. Then he looked back at Monica. "How current is this?" "The date is at the top." He checked it. The document was current. Brooke watched him read. Russell stayed beside the control post. Caleb unfolded the Ferris wheel ticket again and pressed the crease flat with his thumb. Darren handed the medical sheet back. The paper had not changed anything he was asking Monica to do. Brooke looked at him. "The restriction matches the accommodation." Darren nodded once. "I heard you." He looked toward the open area beside the gate, then toward the bench. Monica placed the medical page back inside the folder. The process had now produced more information than Russell had when he first stopped her. The gate reader had accepted the credential. Brooke's handheld unit had accepted it. Guest Accessibility Services had confirmed it. The medical sheet matched the restriction already in the park record. Darren had seen all four. The gate was still closed. He asked Monica whether she could move the wheelchair several feet away from the entrance while he continued sorting out the situation. Monica looked behind her. The access lane had narrowed. Several families with strollers had stopped farther back rather than pushing around the police contact. She looked toward Darren again. "I can move myself if you give me some room." Darren glanced at the path behind the chair. Brooke stepped to one side. There was enough space if the people waiting behind them moved back. Russell did not open the gate. He also did not direct the waiting line away from the chair. Darren looked down at Monica's hands. Both were resting on the wheels. She had not moved. He had arrived to resolve a disagreement. It was about whether she should have to prove she needed the wheelchair. The park had told him she did not. The medical document said standing was restricted. The access credential remained valid. Darren still treated the physical question as unfinished. He stepped behind the wheelchair. Monica turned her head enough to see him. His right hand moved toward the push handle. The green light on the reader had gone dark from inactivity. The approval had not. Darren Holt stopped behind Monica Ellison's wheelchair. His hand had not touched the push handle yet. Brooke Sandoval stood near the left side of the gate with her tablet against her chest. Russell Pike remained beside the barrier control. The medical sheet was back inside Monica's folder. Nothing about the paperwork was still pending. Brooke looked toward the path behind Monica. Several families had stopped there with strollers and small children. The lane was narrow, but it was not blocked. Brooke stepped toward the waiting group. "Give her some room, please." 2 strollers rolled backward. A man carrying a toddler moved closer to the regular walkway. The space behind the wheelchair opened. Monica placed both palms against the wheel rims. "I can move myself." Darren looked down at her hands. "I'll move you." Monica turned her head. "Please don't." Her voice did not rise. Darren stayed behind the chair. Brooke looked at him. "She can reposition herself." He glanced toward the gate. "We need this lane clear." Brooke pointed toward the space she had just opened. "It is clear enough for her to move." Darren did not answer. Caleb stepped away from the railing. He had been watching the adults from several feet away. The folded Ferris wheel ticket was still in his hand. He moved toward the wheelchair. Brooke saw him first. "Caleb, stay by the rail for me." He stopped. Monica looked at him. "Stay there, sweetheart." Caleb returned to the railing. He did not speak. Darren looked from Caleb back to Monica. The scene had become quieter. No one was trying to enter the gate. No one was pushing through the access lane. Russell had stopped using the radio. Brooke's tablet still showed the current accommodation. Darren's body camera faced the back of Monica's chair and the open space behind it. Brooke opened the access procedure again. She moved to Darren's side so he could see it without leaving the chair. The entry instructions were short. An active credential allowed the guest to use the designated access route. If the credential failed, staff referred the guest to Guest Accessibility Services. Nothing on the page gave security or police a second medical screening step. Nothing required standing. Nothing required walking. Nothing required transferring out of a mobility device. Darren read the section. Brooke waited until he reached the bottom. "She has completed the park process." Darren looked at Monica. "I'm not deciding her medical condition." Brooke held the tablet steady. "Then there's nothing left to test." For a moment, Darren said nothing. He could have stepped away. Russell could have opened the gate. Brooke could have returned Monica to the access lane. The family could have continued toward the Ferris wheel. Instead, Darren pointed toward the open area behind the chair. "Move back over there." Monica looked over her shoulder. She checked the wheel position. The right rear wheel was close to the textured edge, separating the access surface from the service path. She adjusted her left hand. "I can do it. Just give me a second." Darren looked at the chair. Monica began to turn the wheel rim slowly. The front casters shifted a few inches. She stopped to correct the angle. Her movement was controlled. Brooke watched the wheels. Russell watched Darren. The chair had moved less than a foot. Darren stepped closer. I said over there. Monica stopped moving. I heard you. She looked at the pavement behind her again. I need to turn first. Darren reached toward the right push handle. Monica saw the movement. Don't move the chair for me. His hand stopped just above the grip. Brooke lowered the tablet. She has a standing restriction. Let her control the chair. Darren looked at Brooke. Then he looked at the folder in Monica's lap. He had already read the medical sheet. He knew the restriction was current. He knew Guest Accessibility Services had approved the wheelchair accommodation. He knew Brooke had verified the credential twice. He knew Monica had offered to move without assistance. No new information had appeared since he walked behind the chair. Russell stepped away from the gate control. The barrier remained closed. A few feet away, Caleb rubbed the edge of his ticket between his fingers. Monica placed both hands back on the wheels. She began turning the chair again. The right caster moved toward the wider section of pavement. Darren reached down. His fingers closed around the push handle. Darren Holt pulled the push handle. Monica Ellison hadn't finished turning the chair. The right rear wheel rolled first. The front casters followed at different angles. One caster reached the raised edge. It was where the smooth access lane met the textured service pavement. It caught. The wheelchair turned sharply to the left. Monica's shoulder moved with it. Her hands left the wheel rims. They closed around the armrests. The folder across her lap slid several inches. A corner of the medical sheet showed through the opening. Darren stopped pulling. The chair had moved less than 3 feet. Monica stayed upright. Her right hand remained on the armrest. The left moved across her abdomen. Brooke Sandoval lowered the tablet. Don't move the chair. Darren released the handle. Monica said nothing. She leaned back against the seat and kept one hand where it was. Her breathing hitched. Brooke stepped toward her, then stopped before touching the wheelchair. Monica, do you want medical? Monica waited through several breaths. Yes. Brooke reached for the radio, clipped at her waist. She called Park Medical and gave the gate number. Pregnant guest. Wheelchair. New abdominal pain after the chair had been moved. Medical assistance requested. Russell Pike stood beside the gate control. He had not opened the barrier. His radio remained on his belt. Caleb moved away from the railing. Monica raised one hand toward him. Stay there for me. He stopped. The Ferris wheel ticket hung from his fingers. Brooke moved between Caleb and the wheelchair so he could still see his mother without entering the working space around the chair. Darren looked down at the pavement. The front caster was still angled against the textured edge. The wheel had left a faint curved mark in dust near the seam. He reached toward the chair. Brooke lifted her hand. Medical is coming. Leave it where it is. Darren stopped. This time he stepped away. Monica kept both feet on the footrests. She did not attempt to straighten the chair. The request to prove she could stand was no longer being discussed. Neither was the entrance. A park employee approached from the regular walkway after seeing Brooke on the radio. Brooke directed him to hold the access lane and send arriving guests to the next designated entrance. He moved the portable sign. The waiting strollers turned away. For the first time since Russell stopped Monica, the physical gate was no longer the center of the operation. Monica looked toward Brooke. Did you see what happened? Yes. Brooke did not add an opinion. She reopened the incident record. The earlier entries were still visible. Credential active. Guest Accessibility Services. Confirmation. Police requested while accommodation remained valid. Brooke added another line. She entered that the wheelchair had been moved by the responding officer immediately before Monica reported abdominal pain. She did not write that the movement caused an injury. Medical personnel had not arrived yet. She recorded only what she had seen. Darren watched her type. What are you entering? An incident note. Brooke finished the field. The system assigned the entry to her employee account. She locked the tablet screen. Russell finally moved away from the barrier control. He looked toward the service lane. No one spoke to him. The regular park noise continued beyond the trees. A ride announcement played through overhead speakers. The Ferris wheel moved through another full rotation. Caleb remained by the railing. The ticket was crumpled now. Monica shifted her left hand slightly across her abdomen. She stopped again. Darren stood several feet behind the chair. His hands were empty. The medical restriction he had read less than a minute earlier remained inside Monica's folder. The active accommodation was still stored in the park system, and Brooke had already confirmed that Monica could move the wheelchair herself. None of those facts had required Darren to take control of the chair. Now another record existed? Not a police report. Not a later complaint. A park employee had entered what she saw, while everyone involved was still standing at the gate. A medical cart appeared at the end of the service lane. Brooke raised one arm so the crew could identify the location. Two emergency medical technicians stepped down with a compact equipment bag. One walked directly toward Monica. The other looked at the wheelchair before approaching from the open side. "Has anyone moved her since the pain started?" Brooke answered, "No." The technician nodded. "Keep it that way." Darren took another step back. The chair remained exactly where the caster had caught. The first emergency medical technician stopped beside Monica Ellison's wheelchair. He did not touch the chair. His partner placed the equipment bag on the pavement and crouched on the open side. "Where is the pain?" Monica kept one hand across the lower part of her abdomen. "Here," the technician asked when it started. Monica looked toward the front caster, still resting near the raised edge. After the chair moved, Brooke Sandoval stood several feet away, with her tablet locked against her side. Darren Holt remained behind the wheelchair. Russell Pike had moved closer to the gate post. The technician asked if Monica had fallen. "No." "Did you stand?" "No." "Did anyone transfer you out of the chair?" "No." He nodded and opened the blood pressure cuff. His partner checked Monica's pulse while speaking in short, ordinary questions. How many weeks pregnant? Whether the pain was constant? Whether there had been bleeding? Whether she had felt the baby move recently? Monica answered each one. Caleb watched from the railing. Brooke stayed close enough that he could see her, but far enough to leave the medical team room. The Ferris wheel ticket was still in his hand. Darren stepped forward once. The second technician raised his palm. "Give us space." Darren stopped. The medical crew now controlled the area around the chair. That changed the scene without anyone announcing it. Russell no longer controlled access. Darren no longer decided where Monica would be positioned. Brooke moved the portable barrier farther down the lane and directed foot traffic around the medical response. The technicians worked where the wheelchair had stopped. No one asked Monica to demonstrate anything. The first technician finished the blood pressure reading. He spoke quietly to his partner. The second technician wrote the values on the run sheet. Monica looked toward Brooke. "Did he move the chair before I said I was hurting?" Brooke answered only what she had seen. "Yes." Darren looked at her. Brooke did not continue. The technician turned toward her. "You witnessed the movement?" "Yes." "How far?" Brooke looked at the pavement. "Less than a few feet." The front wheel caught on that edge, and the chair turned. The technician followed her line of sight. The caster was still angled toward the seam. He entered the description. He did not write that Darren caused an injury. He documented the movement reported and observed before the onset of pain. Monica's medical condition would be evaluated separately. The distinction kept the record narrow. Darren stepped closer again. "I was clearing the access lane." The technician looked at him. "Was she moved after the pain started?" "No. That's all I need right now." Darren stopped speaking. His explanation did not change the medical sequence. The second technician asked Monica about her existing pregnancy restriction. Monica opened the folder across her lap. She handed over the same clinic sheet Darren had already read. The technician reviewed it under the shade of the gate structure. Wheelchair use. Limited standing. Reduced walking. He returned the page. We're not going to have you stand for this assessment. Monica nodded. Brooke looked toward Darren for less than a second. She said nothing. The first technician attached a compact monitor. His partner called Glen Haven Regional Medical Center and gave the receiving unit a brief report. Pregnant patient, new abdominal pain, existing mobility restriction, no fall. Symptoms began after wheelchair movement. The receiving nurse asked whether the patient could safely transfer to a stretcher. The technician looked at Monica. We'll move you only if we need to, and we'll control the transfer. That was the first instruction Monica received after Darren released the chair. It came from the people responsible for moving her safely. Brooke unlocked her tablet. She reopened the incident record. The earlier note remained visible. She added the arrival of Park Medical and the recommendation that Monica not be repositioned during assessment. The entry was tied to her employee account. A separate medical run sheet was being created at the same time. 2 records now existed outside Darren's control. Neither depended on his report. Caleb shifted at the railing. Monica looked toward him. Come a little closer. Brooke guided him to the side of the medical area without letting him step between the technicians and the chair. He stopped beside his mother. Monica reached out and touched his forearm. The technician finished another reading. Then he looked at Monica. I want you evaluated at Glen Haven Regional. Monica asked if an ambulance was necessary. He said transport was recommended because of the pregnancy and the new pain. She agreed. The second technician radioed for the transport unit. Brooke entered the time. Darren watched her. Russell remained near the gate. The active accessibility pass was still in the park system. No standing test had ever been part of that system. Enforcing it had produced a medical response. It also created a park incident record and a transport request. A larger ambulance entered the service lane several minutes later. The technician stepped toward Darren before the stretcher came out. Do not move the wheelchair. Darren nodded. No one else had to repeat the instruction this time. The ambulance doors were still open when Adrian Ellison reached the south service lane. He came through the employee access point at a fast walk. He slowed when he saw Monica. She was still in the wheelchair. One technician stood beside her with the transport sheet. Another was preparing the stretcher several feet away. Caleb saw Adrian first. Dad. Adrian crossed the remaining distance and stopped beside his son. He placed one hand on Caleb's shoulder. Then he looked at Monica. What happened? Monica kept her answers short. The chair was moved. I started having pain. Adrian looked toward the front caster. It was still turned toward the raised pavement seam. Darren Holt stood farther back now. Russell Pike remained near the gate. Brooke Sandoval was holding the park tablet. Adrian did not approach either man. He turned to the technician. Are they taking her in? Yes. For the pregnancy? New abdominal pain after movement of the wheelchair. We want her evaluated. Adrian nodded. He did not ask the technician to change the transport plan. He looked at Monica again. Do you want me with you? Yes. Caleb tightened his grip around the paper ticket. Adrian crouched beside him. You're coming with me. The boy nodded. Brooke stepped closer. I saw the chair move. Adrian stood. What did you see? Brooke told him the same account she had already entered into the park record. Monica had an active accessibility credential. Guest Accessibility Services had confirmed it. Officer Holt took control of the wheelchair while Monica was repositioning herself. The front caster caught the pavement edge. Monica reported pain immediately afterward. Brooke stopped there. She stopped short of describing Darren's intent. She did not tell Adrian what the officer should have done. Adrian looked toward the closed gate. The accessibility reader had gone dark again. Brooke touched the screen. Monica's credential returned to view. Still active? Adrian read the status. Then he looked at the medical folder across Monica's lap. Was that shown? Monica nodded. To security and the officer. Adrian did not respond. The transport technician moved the stretcher closer. He explained how the transfer would be handled and asked Monica to remain seated until the crew was ready. She agreed. Another marked police vehicle entered the service lane. Sergeant Helen Dorsey stepped out. She spoke first with the medical crew. Then she walked toward Darren. Their exchange lasted less than a minute. Darren pointed toward Russell once. After that, Helen looked at the wheelchair, the gate, and Brooke's tablet. Adrian stayed beside Monica. He did not join the officers' conversation. Helen came over after the transport crew finished preparing the stretcher. "Are you her husband?" "Yes. I'm Sergeant Dorsey. I'm taking over the police side of this." Adrian gave his name. Helen looked toward the secured service exit. "Are you riding with her?" "If the medical crew allows it. They can take one adult through the service route. I need identification before I clear you into that area." Adrian reached inside his jacket. He removed a plain credential wallet and opened it low between them. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Adrian Ellison." Helen looked at the photograph. Then, the name. She handed it back. "All right." Darren was close enough to see the wallet close. His position did not change. The stretcher did not stop. Monica's access status did not change. Brooke's incident record remained the same. Helen turned away from Adrian and looked at Brooke. "You're the accessibility coordinator?" "Yes. I need the procedure that applied at this gate today." Brooke unlocked the tablet. She opened the same section she had shown Russell and Darren. Helen read it without speaking. "Active credential. Entry through the designated access route. Referral to guest accessibility services only if the credential required review." She moved to the visitor record. Monica's status showed current approval. Helen looked at Brooke. Was there any additional standing requirement? No. Any walking demonstration? No. Any transfer test? No. Helen looked toward the open ambulance. Monica was being moved under the medical crew's direction now. The transfer used 2 technicians. Neither asked her to prove she could walk. Adrian followed beside Caleb. Before stepping into the transport area, he looked back once. Helen was still standing with Brooke. The FBI credential was already back inside his jacket. Brooke's tablet was still open. That was the record Helen kept reading. Sergeant Helen Dorsey kept Brooke Sandoval's tablet in view. The ambulance crew finished loading Monica Ellison. The accessibility procedure fit on one screen. Helen read the procedure from top to bottom. Active credentials were accepted at the designated entrance. Questions about eligibility went back to guest accessibility services. Nothing authorized security staff to create a physical test at the gate. Helen handed the tablet back. Who asked her to stand first? Brooke looked toward Russell Pike. He did. Russell stayed beside the control post. Helen walked over. "What were you trying to verify?" Russell glanced at Darren Holt before answering. Whether she actually needed the chair. Helen looked at the reader beside him. The credential was active? Yes. And guest accessibility confirmed it? Brooke answered from several feet away. Yes. Helen turned back to Russell. What made you add another step? Russell rubbed one thumb against the edge of his radio. We've had people misuse the access lanes. Helen waited. Russell did not identify a specific complaint involving Monica. He did not name a warning attached to her credential. The gate reader had produced no alert. Helen shifted her attention to Darren. You were told the accommodation was valid? Darren nodded. I was told the pass was active. That's not the same question. Brooke looked down at the tablet. Darren corrected himself. Yes. I was told guest accessibility had approved it. Helen pointed toward the medical folder now resting on the ambulance stretcher beside Monica. You also reviewed the restriction? Yes. What did it say? Limited standing and walking. No one replied. Helen looked toward the pavement seam where the caster had caught. The chair was still positioned at an angle. No one had moved it since medical personnel took control. Brooke had preserved the location because the park incident process required the scene condition to be documented. Normal operations couldn't resume until that was done. Helen walked around the chair without touching it. She looked at the open space behind it. The lane was wider now that staff had redirected guests. Then she returned to Darren. When did you decide you needed a physical demonstration? Darren folded his arms. I was trying to resolve an access dispute. Helen looked at Brooke. Was there an access dispute inside the park system? No. The credential was current? Yes. The issuing office had confirmed it? Yes. Helen turned back to Darren. Then, what was still unresolved? Darren looked toward Russell. Russell did not speak. For several seconds, the only sound near the gate came from the ambulance engine and the music farther inside the park. Darren finally said he was trying to determine whether Monica's mobility matched the accommodation in use. Helen looked at him. Did the park ask you to make that determination? No. Did medical? No. Did she fail the access check? Darren paused. No. The police side of the incident had become smaller. There was no stolen pass, no false name, no expired accommodation, no report that Monica had entered a restricted area. The remaining question was narrow. It fit inside a single sequence. The park approved the accommodation. Russell added a physical demonstration. Darren enforced the same requirement after reading a current medical restriction. Then the wheelchair moved. Helen looked toward Brooke. I need your incident note preserved as entered. Brooke nodded. It's already tied to my employee account. Don't amend the original entry. If the park needs more, add a separate follow-up. Brooke acknowledged the instruction. Helen used her radio to request a supervisor event number. It was for a special event contact involving a medical transport. She did not classify Monica as disorderly. She did not use Russell's earlier wording about refusal. The dispatcher returned an incident number. Helen wrote it on a small field card. Darren watched. Sergeant, am I being pulled from the detail? For this contact, yes. He looked toward the gate. We still have a crowd issue. Helen followed his line of sight. The access lane was nearly empty. Park staff had already redirected traffic. There isn't a crowd issue here now. Darren did not answer. Helen told him to return to the South Command Post and remain available for a statement. He started to speak again. She held up one hand. That's the instruction. Darren walked toward the service lane. No handcuffs. No public confrontation. No badge removed. His authority over Monica's contact simply ended there. Russell remained by the gate. Helen turned to him next. Do not screen another accessibility credential until your supervisor gets here. Russell stepped away from the control post. Brooke moved toward the barrier. She did not reopen normal access yet. The scene still had to be documented. At the ambulance, Adrian Ellison stood beside Caleb while Monica was secured for transport. He looked once toward Helen. She did not approach him. She was still working from the park procedure, the medical restriction, and the people who had been at the gate before he arrived. The ambulance doors closed. The vehicle pulled away through the service lane. Helen watched it leave. Then she looked back at the wheelchair. The question had changed. No one was asking Monica to prove anything anymore. The department now had to explain why anyone had asked her to prove it in the first place. By the time Monica Ellison reached Glen Haven Regional Medical Center, Hawthorne Adventure Park had already opened a separate incident file. It did not belong to Darren Holt. It did not belong to Palisade Event Security. Brooke Sandoval had created the first entry under the park's guest accessibility system while everyone was still standing at the gate. Now Hawthorne's risk office took control of the file. At the hospital, Monica remained in the wheelchair until a maternity nurse arrived with a transport chair designed for clinical transfer. The nurse reviewed the restriction sheet before moving her. She asked about the abdominal pain, the pregnancy history, and the movement that happened at the park. Monica answered in the same order she had given the emergency crew. The chair had been pulled backward. The front caster caught the pavement edge. Her body shifted. The pain followed. The nurse entered the description into the medical record. She did not ask who was at fault. A physician examined Monica later that afternoon. The evaluation did not produce an immediate emergency delivery. The medical team kept her for observation long enough to confirm that the pregnancy remained stable. The new pain required monitoring rather than surgery. Her existing mobility restriction stayed in place. Walking remained limited. Standing remained limited. Nothing in the hospital record suggested Monica had been physically able to perform the demonstration Russell Pike and Darren requested. Adrian Ellison sat with Caleb in the waiting area. Monica was being examined. His phone rang once from an unfamiliar local number. The caller identified herself as Lauren Mercer from Hawthorne's risk office. She did not ask Adrian for his federal title. She asked whether Monica was available to speak. "She's being evaluated." "Then I'll contact her later." Lauren requested only a reliable family contact number and the name of the medical facility. Adrian provided both. Before the call ended, he asked one question. "Are you preserving the gate records?" "Yes." That was enough. He did not tell her how to conduct the review. He did not ask to receive internal reports. He did not identify witnesses for the park. Monica was the person involved in the incident. The park would contact her directly. Back at Hawthorne, Lauren opened the accessibility incident record Brooke had started. The first screen contained Monica's active credential status and the issuing office information. Brooke's entries appeared beneath it in the order she had entered them. The credential had been verified. Guest Accessibility Services had confirmed the accommodation. Police had been requested while the accommodation remained active. The wheelchair had later been moved by the responding officer. Medical assistance followed. Lauren did not rewrite those entries into a summary. She preserved them as submitted. Then she opened a separate evidence section. The access reader stored credential activity for operational troubleshooting. Monica's scan showed an accepted result. Brooke's handheld verification showed the same status. Guest Accessibility Services had also retained the internal confirmation linked to Monica's visitor record. 3 park systems now showed the same thing without relying on anyone's memory. The accommodation was current. Lauren requested the camera view covering Accessibility Gate 3. The camera did not record private medical paperwork. It did show the lane, the barrier, Monica's wheelchair, the people around it, and the spot where the chair shifted. The video was copied into the incident file before the normal retention cycle could overwrite it. Russell's radio traffic went to a different system. Lauren sent a request to Park Security Control for the original transmission associated with the gate call. She also requested the Palisade assignment sheet identifying which security employee had responsibility for that location. The requests were administrative. They did not accuse Russell of misconduct. They fixed who had been working the gate and what had been communicated before police arrived. Brooke's written procedure was added next. The rule in effect that afternoon gave security a limited job at accessible entrances. Confirm that the credential was active. Refer unresolved credential problems to Guest Accessibility Services. The procedure contained no standing demonstration. Lauren printed nothing. The record stayed inside the controlled claim file, where access was logged automatically. Palisade Event Security had not yet submitted its final account. That mattered for a practical reason. The contractor still had time to describe what its employee believed had happened. Hawthorne now had the underlying park records preserved before receiving that description. At the hospital, Monica was cleared to go home later that evening. She was told to reduce activity and to return if the pain changed. The family left through the patient entrance. They had entered Hawthorne that morning expecting to spend the day inside the park. Instead, the day ended with a medical discharge sheet and a parking receipt. An unused ride ticket remained folded inside Caleb's pocket. Before Hawthorne closed for the night, Lauren sent one final notice. Palisade Event Security was directed to preserve all records connected to Accessibility Gate 3, including Russell Pike's radio communications, assignment notes, and any internal report created after the incident. The notice was issued before Palisade finished writing its version of the day. Hawthorne Adventure Park opened the Palisade Event Security Agreement the next morning. The document was not part of Monica Ellison's medical file. It did not describe her pregnancy. It defined what Russell Pike had been hired to do. Lauren Mercer from the park's risk office reviewed the contract with Hawthorne's operations director. An insurance representative assigned to the incident joined the review. The section covering accessible entrances was short. Palisade employees could manage lines and prevent unauthorized entry. They could confirm that an accessibility credential was active and contact guest accessibility services when a credential could not be verified. Medical eligibility belonged to the park. The contract gave Palisade no authority to decide whether a guest qualified to use an approved accommodation. Lauren moved to the operating attachment used for special event days. The language was more detailed there. Security could control the physical gate. Guest accessibility services controlled accommodation status. If a reader showed an active credential, the security employee either admitted the guest or contacted the accessibility desk about a specific system problem. Nothing in the attachment authorized a standing demonstration. There was no physical test for wheelchair users. The insurance representative asked whether Palisade had issued separate instructions to Russell. Hawthorne did not have that answer yet. Lauren added it to the document request already sent to the contractor. The question was different from the ones raised at the gate. The park was determining whether Russell had possessed the authority he claimed when he added another requirement. A second agreement was opened after that. It covered Glen Haven police officers assigned to Hawthorne during high attendance days. The city provided officers for public safety calls, traffic control, criminal complaints, disturbances, and situations requiring police authority. The agreement did not transfer Hawthorne's disability accommodation decisions to the police department. An officer could respond when security requested help. That response did not make the officer an accessibility evaluator. Lauren read the section twice. Then, she placed the city agreement beside the Palisade contract. Russell had authority over the gate. Brooke Sandoval had authority to verify the accommodation. Darren Holt had police authority when a legitimate law enforcement issue existed. None of those roles included creating a new medical qualification standard. The three positions had been standing within several feet of one another. Their authority had not been interchangeable. That became the first major finding in Hawthorne's internal risk review. Later that morning, Palisade sent its preliminary incident report. Russell described Monica as unwilling to complete an additional screening step after concerns arose about use of the accessible entrance. He wrote that police assistance had been requested to prevent the disagreement from disrupting gate operations. The report did not identify a written source for the additional screening step. Lauren searched the attachments. There was no Palisade policy authorizing one. She sent a follow-up request. The contractor was asked to identify the exact rule, training instruction, supervisor direction, or park communication Russell had relied on when he asked Monica to stand. Palisade acknowledged the request. No supporting document arrived with the acknowledgement. Brooke's account required no similar reconstruction. Her job description placed accommodation verification within guest accessibility services. The handheld scan showed Monica's approval. The same office had confirmed the credential by phone. Her incident note recorded those facts before Monica left the park. The risk team did not need to decide which employee sounded more convincing. Each employee's authority could be checked against the job they had actually been assigned. By early afternoon, Hawthorne made an interim operational decision. Palisade guards would remain at general entrances and crowd control points. They would no longer screen accessibility credentials while the incident review remained open. Those gates would be staffed by Hawthorne employees trained through guest accessibility services. The change began before the weekend schedule was posted. It carried a cost. Hawthorne had to move trained employees from other guest service locations, authorize additional shifts, and pay for temporary staffing at several high-volume entrances. Palisade lost billable hours attached to the screening function. The contract had not been canceled. Its scope had narrowed. Russell was removed from Hawthorne property, while Palisade completed its own personnel review. No announcement went out to park visitors. The change appeared first in a revised staffing sheet. At Glenhaven Police, Sergeant Helen Dorsey received a copy of the park procedure through the incident file. She also received the section of the city's special event agreement defining police responsibilities. The documents answered a question Darren's field statement had left open. He had described his role as resolving an access dispute. The agreement showed that the park had never assigned that decision to him. By then, Monica's medical evaluation was complete. Her accommodation had been verified before the incident, during the incident, and again through Hawthorne's review. The park no longer needed another opinion about whether she qualified. It needed to determine how a valid accommodation had passed through the correct system and still been stopped at the gate. The answer was beginning to take shape in the contracts. The system had not failed to create a rule. Two people had already acted beyond that rule. Lauren Mercer did not begin with Monica Ellison's wheelchair. She began with the gate. Hawthorne's camera system stored continuous video from Accessibility Gate 3. It included the minutes before Monica arrived and the period after the medical crew left. The risk office requested a narrow review window. Same entrance. Same security employee. Same operating procedure. Lauren sat with the insurance representative while the video played on a conference room monitor. The first several minutes showed ordinary traffic. Guests approached the reader. Wristbands were scanned. Russell Pike opened the barrier when the reader accepted them. A family with a stroller used the regular lane. Two teenagers entered through the standard queue. Then, an older man appeared at the accessible entrance. He was white. He held a metal cane in his right hand. Russell was already standing at the control post. The man raised his wristband. The reader turned green. Russell looked at the display. He opened the gate. The man walked through. The entire contact lasted only a few seconds. Russell did not ask how long he had used the cane. He did not ask whether he could walk without it. No medical folder was requested. The insurance representative stopped the video. Same credential class? Lauren checked the access log. Yes. The park system showed the man had been issued the same general category of mobility accommodation used by Monica. His individual medical information was not part of the review. It did not need to be. The question was how staff handled an active credential at that gate. Lauren restarted the recording. Several minutes passed. Monica entered the camera frame with Caleb beside her. Her wheelchair moved into the designated access lane. She scanned the wristband. The same reader turned green. Russell did not open the barrier. He looked at Monica, then at the wheelchair. His first exchange with her lasted longer than the entire contact with the earlier guest. The camera had no close microphone. Body position and timing were visible. Monica opened the folder across her lap. Russell stayed in front of the gate. Brooke Sandoval arrived later and scanned the credential again. The barrier remained closed. Lauren placed the two entries side by side in the review file. She did not label one correct and the other discriminatory. She recorded the observable difference. The earlier guest received entry after the active credential appeared. Monica received an additional mobility inquiry after the same system response. The insurance representative asked whether park policy had changed between the two contacts. Lauren checked the operations log. No update had been issued. No supervisor had changed the gate procedure. Russell's assignment had not changed. Brooke confirmed the same point in a short follow-up statement. The rule used when the older man entered was still in effect when Monica arrived. That removed another possible explanation. The difference had not come from the credential system. It had not come from a shift change. It had not come from a new safety notice. The gate was the same. So was the employee controlling it? Lauren moved forward through the video. Russell's radio call appeared next. Darren Holt arrived later. The footage showed Brooke presenting the tablet. Darren read Monica's medical sheet. He then moved behind the wheelchair. Lauren slowed the playback when Monica began repositioning herself. The right wheel began turning under Monica's hands. Darren stepped closer. His hand reached the push handle. The chair moved backward. The front caster struck the raised edge and changed direction. Monica's left hand moved to her abdomen almost immediately. Brooke stepped forward. The insurance representative wrote one line on a legal pad. Then she asked for the earlier guest's access event again. Lauren returned to it. Green reader. Gate opens. Guest enters. She advanced to Monica. Green reader. Gate stays closed. The contrast did not require a speech. By afternoon, the insurer sent Hawthorne a written notice. It changed the status of the claim. The matter would no longer be evaluated solely as a communication dispute between a guest and contract security. The review would include unequal application of an approved access procedure and the physical consequence that followed the added requirement. That language affected more than Russell's personnel file. Palisades' contract required the company to follow Hawthorne's guest access procedures when performing screening work. If an employee created an additional standard and applied it inconsistently, the insurer could question whether that conduct fell within the contracted service being defended. Lauren sent the notice to Hawthorne's legal office and Palisades' contract manager. No accusation of intent was added. The camera could not record intent. It had recorded treatment. Palisade responded before the end of the day. The contractor confirmed that no separate mobility test instruction had been issued to Russell before Monica's visit. His supervisor had reminded staff to watch for credential misuse during busy periods. The written instruction directed employees back to guest accessibility services when a concern arose. It did not authorize a standing demonstration. That answer closed the remaining operational gap. Russell had not been following a second rule hidden from Hawthorne. He had added one. Brooke's original incident entry, the contract language, and the camera comparison now described the same problem from different directions. The park had approved Monica. The gate system had accepted her. Another guest received entry under that process. Monica received an extra condition. Lauren updated the risk file. She did not add a conclusion about what Russell believed when he looked at Monica. The file did not need one to show that the process had changed only when Monica reached the gate. By close of business, Palisades' temporary removal from accessibility screening was no longer being treated as a scheduling precaution. Hawthorne began drafting a formal contract modification. The next decision would not be about one employee standing at one gate. It would decide whether private security would keep any authority over accessibility screening at the park at all. Hawthorne Adventure Park did not wait for the end of Russell Pike's personnel review. The contract question had already moved beyond him. Lauren Mercer met with the operations director, the head of guest accessibility services, and Hawthorne's procurement counsel the following morning. Palisade Event Security joined on the conference call. The issue on the table was narrow. Who should control accessibility screening at ride entrances? Until Monica Ellison's incident, the arrangement had divided responsibility between two groups. Guest accessibility services decided whether an accommodation was valid. Palisade controlled the physical gate and confirmed that the credential was active. That division had looked efficient on paper. At Gate 3, it had allowed the person controlling entry to create a second standard after the authorized decision had already been made. Procurement Council opened the current service agreement. The contractor can verify status, she said. It cannot reassess eligibility. No one on the call disputed the sentence. Palisades regional manager said Russell had acted outside company instruction. Hawthorne's operations director looked at the camera comparison already attached to the review. The older guest had been admitted after one accepted scan. Monica had received the same accepted result and a different burden. Removing Russell would address the employee. It would not address the structure that had allowed his judgment to block an approved accommodation. The park chose the larger correction, effective before the next weekend. Palisade would no longer control accessibility screening at ride entry points. Its guards could remain nearby for crowd management, emergency response, and general security. They would not decide whether an approved guest entered an accessibility lane. That function moved to Hawthorne employees, assigned through guest accessibility services. The contract modification was written that afternoon. It did not contain a new disability test. It removed one. At gate locations where an active credential appeared, trained accessibility staff would control the barrier. If the credential required review, the same staff would send the question back through the park system. Security could assist if a separate safety or criminal issue arose. It could not convert uncertainty into a medical screening process. The operational change carried an immediate financial cost. Hawthorne needed trained employees at several entrances. Those entrances had previously been covered by contract security. Schedules had to be rebuilt. Part-time guest service employees received additional hours. 2 supervisors were moved from other areas during peak periods. The park also paid for expedited training so enough employees could cover the remaining summer calendar. Those costs stayed with Hawthorne. Palisade lost the corresponding billable work. The reduction was large enough to require a formal amendment, rather than a scheduling adjustment. Its regional manager requested a temporary arrangement that would allow experienced guards to remain at the gates under park supervision. Hawthorne declined. The function itself was being transferred, not temporarily shared. Russell received separate notice from Palisade. He was removed from the Hawthorne account and could not return to the property while the contractor completed its employment process. The park did not decide whether Palisade kept him elsewhere. Hawthorne decided only who could work under its contract. That distinction kept the consequence tied to the gate. Brooke Sandoval received a different notice. Her role expanded for the remainder of the season. She would help assign accessibility staff. She would also review any gate question that the credential system could not resolve. The notice did not call her a whistleblower. It did not give her a ceremonial title. Her responsibilities increased because the function now belonged to the department she already worked in. By Friday morning, revised staffing sheets had reached every ride zone. Gate 3 listed a Hawthorne employee under accessibility control. The Palisade position beside it was labeled General Security. No training card was mounted on the fence. No public sign announced that an incident had forced the change. The difference appeared in payroll codes, contract scope, and who held the barrier control. That was enough to change who could stop the next guest. At Glenhaven Police, Sergeant Helen Dorsey received the contract amendment through the city's special event liaison. She added it to the event file, but did not treat it as a police finding. The park had made a commercial decision based on its own authority. Darren Holt's personnel review was still separate. His statement had been submitted. So had Brooks. The medical response and park records were already preserved. The city would decide what happened to Darren. Hawthorne had already decided what would happen to the gate. Monica learned about the change through a written claim update. The letter did not ask her to return to the park. It confirmed that accessibility screening had been removed from Palisade's contracted duties. The work was reassigned to trained park staff. Monica read the paragraph once. Then she placed the letter with her medical discharge papers. Adrian did not call Hawthorne. Caleb was at the kitchen table drawing circles on a sheet of paper. The family had not asked to run the park. They had asked to use an entrance the park had already approved. At Hawthorne, the next weekend schedule went into effect without Russell's name on it. Palisades still had guards inside the property. Hawthorne still had security. The change was smaller in scope but more expensive. The people checking accessibility credentials now worked for the office that had authority to approve them. The gate had not moved. Control of it had. Glenhaven Police completed Darren Holt's personnel review after Hawthorne had already changed the gate contract. The department did. That question had been resolved outside the police process. Her accommodation was active. Guest accessibility services had confirmed it. The medical restriction was current. The personnel review focused on Darren's decisions after he received those facts. Sergeant Helen Dorsey attended the findings meeting with a professional standards lieutenant and the city attorney assigned to special event claims. Darren attended with representation. The written finding identified one central failure. He had treated and approved accessibility accommodation as unfinished and required a physical demonstration. Neither Hawthorne procedure nor the police special event agreement authorized such a demand. The wheelchair movement was reviewed within that same sequence. It was not written as a separate story. Monica had offered to reposition the chair herself. The available space had already been opened. Brooke Sandoval had told Darren to let Monica control the chair because of her standing restriction. Darren took the push handle anyway. The chair moved. The caster caught the pavement edge. Medical response followed. The professional standards lieutenant read the finding aloud. Darren's representative asked whether the department was alleging that he intended to injure Monica. No. The answer stayed in the record. Intent was not the finding. The finding concerned what Darren had authority to require, and what he did after the authorized process had already produced an answer. Darren was given an opportunity to respond. He said he had been trying to clear the access lane. He wanted to resolve a disagreement before it drew more people into the area. Helen did not argue with him. She opened the event file to the operational section. Brooke had already moved waiting guests back. Monica had begun turning the wheelchair under her own control. The lane condition did not require Darren to take the handle. That distinction was entered into the final review. The department sustained the allegation. Darren received an unpaid suspension. He was also removed from paid special event assignments for the remainder of the current park season and the following scheduling cycle. The restriction applied to amusement venues, fairs, stadium details, and other assignments where officers regularly work beside private security or guest service personnel. Returning to disability access event work after that period would require supervisor approval. His regular patrol certification remained active. No state decertification case was open from the administrative finding. There was no badge surrender in a hallway. No criminal charge appeared beside the discipline. When the meeting ended, Darren signed the acknowledgement showing that he had received the decision. His signature did not indicate agreement. It recorded receipt. Helen's position did not change. She stayed in command and continued supervising special event responses. The review found that she had separated Darren from Monica's contact after arriving. She preserved the applicable park procedure and referred the personnel question through the normal channel. There was no manufactured consequence for a supervisor simply because she appeared later in the incident. The findings stayed attached to the actions each person had actually taken. A different process was moving at the same time. Monica's civil claim had reached the city's risk office and Hawthorne's insurer. The files were handled separately from Darren's discipline. Lauren Mercer provided the park records. The city supplied the police event material. Monica's attorney submitted documented expenses rather than a general demand built around publicity. The hospital evaluation was included. Transportation and legal costs were covered. The settlement also covered the unused park admission and time spent on medical follow-ups and claim appointments. The wheelchair itself had not been permanently damaged. No replacement claim was made for it. Caleb's Ferris wheel ticket carried no separate dollar value beyond the park admission. The city and Hawthorne reached a coordinated settlement with Monica. The agreement covered the documented financial loss and resolved the civil claim connected to the incident. It didn't force Monica to call the incident a misunderstanding. The final park disposition stated that her accessibility credential had been valid on the date of the incident. It also confirmed that no physical demonstration had been required under the procedure then in effect. Palisades' contract reduction remained separate from the payment. Darren's suspension remained separate from both. The incident produced 3 separate consequences across 3 systems. The officer lost paid assignment access and salary during suspension. The contractor lost part of its Hawthorne work. The city and park paid the documented financial cost created by the incident. None of those consequences depended on Adrian Ellison's FBI position. His FBI credential showed up only on the service lane ID Helen made when she cleared him to accompany his family. It was not cited in the personnel finding. It was not cited in Hawthorne's contract amendment. It was not needed to establish Monica's eligibility. When Monica received the final disposition, she read the access section first. The language was plain. Her accommodation had been active. No misuse finding had been entered against her. No corrective notation was required on her visitor account. The park never had to change Monica's status. What needed fixing was who was allowed to question it. Monica Ellison received the final settlement packet at home on a Tuesday afternoon. The envelope contained the city agreement, Hawthorne Adventure Park's written disposition, the medical expense summary, and confirmation that the civil claim had been closed. She carried it to the kitchen table. Adrian was already there, with his laptop open. Caleb sat at the other end with a backpack beside his chair. Monica removed the papers, one section at a time. She began with the park disposition. The first page identified the date of the incident and accessibility gate 3. The next section addressed Monica's visitor record. Her accommodation had been active when she arrived. Guest accessibility services had approved it before the gate contact. No misuse finding had been entered. No additional medical screening had been required under the procedure in effect that day. Monica read the paragraph twice. Then she turned the page. The next section described the contract change. Palisade event security no longer controlled. Accessibility screening at Hawthorne ride entrances. That work had moved to guest accessibility services. The security company still worked elsewhere inside the park, but its employees no longer decided whether an active mobility credential was enough to open an accessibility gate. Russell Pike's name appeared only in the incident section. His employment status outside the Hawthorne contract was not included. The park had removed him from its property. What Palisade did after that belonged to the contractor. Monica continued reading. A separate city notice summarized Darren Holt's administrative disposition. The language was narrow. The department sustained the finding that he required a physical demonstration after Hawthorne had already verified Monica's accommodation and after he had reviewed a current mobility restriction. His unpaid suspension had been completed. His paid special event eligibility remained inactive for the stated scheduling period. The notice did not call him a criminal. It did not say he intended to injure Monica. It recorded what the review could support. Adrian closed his laptop. Everything there? Monica looked at the remaining pages. Yes. He reached for the packet. She handed it to him. Adrian checked the financial section, then the disposition dates. His FBI credential was not referenced anywhere in the findings. The only record containing it was still the service lane identification entry created when Sergeant Helen Dorsey cleared him into the medical area. It had never become proof that Monica was entitled to the accommodation. Her entitlement had existed before he arrived. Adrian placed the signed papers into a plain file folder. He wrote the date on the tab. Then he carried the folder toward the small cabinet beside his desk. Monica remained at the kitchen table. There was no press statement to approve. No rally scheduled. No interview waiting. The park had already changed the contract. The department had already completed its personnel process. The documented costs had been paid. The family had nothing left to submit. Across the table, Caleb opened his backpack. School papers came out first. A pencil, a small plastic dinosaur, a folded map from the amusement park. Then, a narrow paper ticket dropped onto the table. Caleb picked it up. The Ferris wheel logo was still visible across the front. Monica recognized it immediately. He had been holding the same ticket beside Accessibility Gate 3. The paper was more wrinkled now. One corner had been folded several times. Caleb flattened it against the table. "We never used this." "No," Monica said. He looked at the printed ride name. "Can we go back sometime?" Monica did not answer immediately. She looked toward Adrian. He had returned from the file cabinet and was standing near the doorway. "We can decide later," she said. Caleb nodded. He did not ask again. Monica picked up the ticket. There was no scan mark across the bottom. No ride time. No employee initials. The ticket had never entered Hawthorne's ride system. The family never reached the Ferris wheel. The financial settlement included the unused admission. The paper itself had no value left. Monica placed it beside Caleb's backpack. "Keep it if you want." He slid it into the front pocket. Adrian sat down beside Monica. The kitchen stayed quiet for a while. Nothing else from the park remained on the table. The medical discharge sheet had already been filed. The settlement papers were in the cabinet. Monica's temporary mobility restriction would remain in place until her doctor changed it. The wheelchair stood folded near the hallway wall. No one at home asked her to prove why it was there. Weeks later, Hawthorne's revised staffing structure remained in effect. Guest accessibility services controlled the access barriers. Palisades' reduced contract reflected the lost screening work. Darren remained outside, paid special event assignments under the disciplinary order. Those changes continued without Monica returning to the park to watch them. She did not need to. The records showed what had happened. The contracts showed what had changed. The costs had been assigned. One Saturday morning, Caleb emptied the front pocket of his backpack while looking for a library card. The Ferris wheel ticket appeared again. He placed it beside Monica's coffee cup and continued searching. Monica picked it up after he left the room. For a few seconds, she looked at the creased paper. Then she placed it back inside his backpack. Caleb's unused Ferris wheel ticket was the only thing the family kept from that afternoon. Subscribe for more stories about accountability, evidence, and the decisions that stay on the record. This story is fictional.